A hand shoved hard between a girl's shoulder blades. She pitched forward and hit the frozen gravel on her knees. The torn gown tore further. Behind her, a carriage door slammed, and laughter spilled out into the cold. A voice called out that the Duke could keep her if the monster wanted a bride. Then wheels turned and the carriage rolled away, leaving her alone at the foot of 2 iron gates. She did not cry. She reached instead for the old dog limping to her side, wrapped both her arms around his bony ribs and shielded him from the wind. Her name was Eleanor Hartwell, and until an hour ago she had a home. Above her, on the steps of a dark manor, a scarred man watched without moving. What made the Duke of Ashford open those gates instead of turning her away? Stay with me on this one. The cold came up through her knees, but she did not move to warm herself. She moved to warm the dog. His name was Barnaby, an old gray wolfhound with one bad leg that dragged behind him when he walked. He had belonged to her father. Now he belonged to no one but her, and she to no one but him, and the two of them knelt together in the gravel while the great house looked down on them both. Eleanor knew whose house it was. Everyone in the county knew. Eleanor Manor, home of Julian Hartwell, the Duke of Ashford, the man who never came to church, the man who never came to town, the man whose face, they whispered, had been ruined in a fire, so ruined that he kept the gates locked and the servants few and the visitors none. Her stepmother had thought that was very funny. Send the scullery girl to the monster. Let the beast have the beggar, see how they suit. But Eleanor was not a beggar. That was the part her stepmother never let her say. 2 years ago she had been Miss Whitcomb of Elmsworth, daughter of a landed gentleman, mistress of a fine house with a library and a garden and a mother buried under a stone she used to visit every Sunday. Then her father married again. Then her father died. And somewhere in those 12 months, the fine house had become a place where she scrubbed floors on her knees and slept in the pantry and ate what the others left. The gate was iron and taller than a man. She stood, pulling Barnaby up by his collar, and she gripped the cold bars, and she looked through them at the dark shape on the steps. She could not go back. She knew that much. Whatever was on the other side of these gates could not be worse than what was behind her. "Sir," she called, her voice cracked. "Please, I have nowhere to go. My dog is old. He can't stand the cold." She swallowed. "I'll work. I'll do anything. Just let him inside. You don't have to keep me, just him." Now here's the thing you have to understand about Julian Hartwell. In 12 years, no one had ever asked him for anything without flinching first. They flinched at the scar that ran from his brow to his jaw. They flinched at the ruined half of his mouth. They came for money or favors or land, and they did their business looking at his boots so they would not have to look at his face. And here was a half-frozen girl in a torn gown, and she was not asking for herself. She was asking for a dog. He came down the steps slowly. Eleanor braced herself. She had learned to read a man's shoulders, and his shoulders told her nothing. When he reached the gate, she made herself look up, and she did not flinch because she had seen worse things than a scar. She had seen her stepmother smile. For a long moment he said nothing. He looked at the dog. He looked at the blood on her knees where the gravel had cut through. He looked at the way her arms were still half wrapped around the animal, ready to shield him again. "Who brought you here?" His voice was low and rough, like a door that had not been opened in years. "It doesn't matter," Eleanor said. "It matters to me." She lifted her chin. "My stepmother, Lady Prudence Whitcomb, she thought it would be amusing," her mouth twisted, "to leave me at your gate. She said the Duke could keep me if the monster wanted a bride." She met his eyes. "I don't think you're a monster, sir. I think you're just a man with a lock on his gate. I have a lock on my life. I understand it better than you'd guess." The Duke was quiet. Then he reached out and unlatched the gate, and it swung open between them with a groan of old iron. "Bring the dog inside," he said. You'll both eat something warm, and then you'll tell me the rest." She did not move at first. She had been tricked too many times to trust an open door. "I have no money," she warned him. "No dowry, no family who will pay to have me back. Whatever my stepmother told you, it was a lie or a joke, and there's nothing for you in it." "I know," Julian said. "That's why I'm asking you in." Inside, the fire was the first warm thing she had felt in a day. A housekeeper named Mrs. Ashby, the only servant Alina would see that night, brought bread and broth and a blanket for the dog. Barnaby lowered himself onto the hearth with a groan and was asleep in a minute. Alina watched him breathe before she ate a bite. That, more than anything, was what Julian noticed. The girl fed the dog with her eyes before she fed herself with her hands. He sat across from her and said little. She told him only what she had to. Her father, Thomas Whitcomb, dead 2 winters past of a fever. Her stepmother, who had come into the marriage with charm and left the funeral with the keys. The slow theft of a life, one small cruelty at a time, until there was nothing left of Miss Whitcomb but a servant who happened to know Latin. "And the estate?" Julian asked. "Elmsworth, your father's land, who holds it now?" "My stepmother manages it," Alina said, "until I marry or until I come of age. I turn 21 next month." She looked into the fire. "I don't expect there will be much left by then. She's been selling the timber and the horses, and I think the paintings, though she tells me they're only being cleaned." Something changed in Julian's face, just a flicker. But Alina, who had spent 2 years learning to read faces so she could survive them, saw it. "You knew my father," she said slowly, "didn't you?" "I knew a Thomas Whitcomb," Julian said, "a long time ago, before the fire. He was kind to me when kindness was expensive." He stood and went to the window and looked out at the dark. "If he was your father, then you are owed a great deal more than a place by my fire, and I intend to find out who has taken it." That was the night everything turned. Not because a duke had shown a kindness. Kindness fades by morning. It turned because Julian Hartwell, who had not left his gate in 12 years, decided he was going to leave it now. He did not tell Alina his plans. He simply began. The next morning, a rider went out from Ravenscar carrying 3 letters, and the morning after that, a solicitor arrived from the county town and shut himself in the library with the Duke for 4 hours. Alina did not know any of this. She knew only that she had been given a room with a real bed and clean clothes that fit, and that no one had asked her to scrub a single thing. She thought, perhaps, she was a servant of a gentler kind. She could live with that. She spent her days in the library. It turned out the monster had the finest library in the county, and it turned out the scullery maid could read Greek. And when Julian found her curled in a window seat with a volume of Homer, mouthing the words, he stood in the doorway a long time before she noticed him. "My father taught me," she said, closing the book, half ashamed, as if reading were a thing she might be punished for. "He said a mind was the one thing no one could take from you." She smiled, small and sad. "He was wrong about that too. They can't take it, but they can make you hide it." "Not here," Julian said. "Here you may read every book in that room aloud if it pleases you." And he left before she could see what his face was doing. Barnaby grew stronger by the fire. His bad leg still dragged, but there was meat on his ribs now, and he followed the Duke through the halls as often as he followed Alina, which made the servants whisper that the beast of Ravenscar had gone soft. Julian let them whisper. For the first time in 12 years there was a sound in his house he had forgotten, and it took him a week to name it. It was laughter. It was Alina reading a foolish line, laughing at herself. Days passed like that. Warm ones. Easy ones. Alina began to believe, against all the hard lessons of her life, that the worst was behind her, that she had walked through the gates of a nightmare and come out somewhere kind. She had a bed. She had her dog. She had books. She had a strange, silent man who watched her from doorways and made sure her plate was full. She let herself, for the first time in 2 years, exhale. That was her mistake, because the letters Julian had sent were coming home now with answers, and the answers were worse than either of them had guessed. The trigger came on the 9th morning, and it came in the form of a carriage. Alina was in the garden with Barnaby when she heard the wheels, and her whole body went cold before her mind caught up. She knew that carriage. She knew the crest on the door. Lady Prudence had come to Ravenscar, and she had not come alone. A second man stepped down after her, thin and pale in the black coat of a lawyer, carrying a leather case under his arm. Alina's first instinct was to run. 2 years of instinct told her to hide, to make herself small, to disappear until the danger passed. She caught Barnaby by the collar and pulled him toward the yew hedge. But Julian was already on the steps, and Julian was not hiding. "Your Grace." Lady Prudence swept into a curtsy that was all mockery. She was a handsome woman, 40 and cold, with a smile she used the way other people used a knife. "How good of you to receive me. I confess I never expected the joke to hold. I sent you a scullery girl as a jest, and here you keep her a fortnight. The whole county talks of it." She tilted her head. "I've come to take her home. She has duties. And it seems there's been enough of your charity." And here's where the story changes, because it stops being about a girl and a duke and a warm fire. Lady Prudence had not driven all this way to collect a scullery maid. No one brings a lawyer to fetch a servant. She had come because Alina's 21st birthday was 3 weeks off, and on that day the girl she had stripped of everything would be old enough to inherit Elmsworth outright. And a girl who inherits can ask questions. A girl who inherits can count the missing horses and the sold timber and the paintings that were never cleaned. Lady Prudence had come to make sure that girl was married off, quietly, to the pale man in the black coat, before she was old enough to look at the books. "Mr. Sedgwick here," Lady Prudence went on smoothly, "is a solicitor of good standing. He has generously offered for Alina's hand, a charitable match given her ruined circumstances. The banns can be read this very Sunday. Come, Alina, say your thanks and let's away." Julian did not move from the top of the steps. "The banns will not be read," he said, "because Miss Whitcomb is not going anywhere." Lady Prudence laughed. "She is my ward, Your Grace, my husband's daughter. I speak for her until she marries." "You speak for her until she comes of age," Julian said. "Which, by my solicitor's reckoning, is the 14th of next month. 23 days. And on that day, Elmsworth passes to her free and clear, does it not? Which is precisely why you've arrived with a wedding in your pocket. Marry her before she can inherit and her husband controls the estate. And her husband, I'd wager, has already promised you the better half." The color went out of Lady Prudence's face, just for a second. Then the smile came back, but it was thinner now. "You've no idea what you're speaking of," she said. "I have every idea," Julian said. "I've spent 9 days learning it." He turned to Mr. Sedgwick, and the scar caught the light, and the lawyer took a step back. "You've made your offer. Now leave my land. Both of you. Miss Whitcomb stays as my guest until the day she is legally free to decide her own life. And on that day, if she chooses to go with you, I'll open the gate myself, but not one moment before." For a moment no one spoke. Then Lady Prudence's mask slipped entirely, and what was underneath was ugly. "You think you've saved her," she hissed. "You've ruined her, a girl of good family living unwed under a bachelor's roof. Do you know what they'll say? I'll see her name in every drawing room in the county by Michaelmas. She'll be finished. No decent man will have her, and when I'm through they won't let her within a mile of Elmsworth, inheritance or no." She yanked her skirts around. "Enjoy your monster, Alina. You've thrown yourself away to a beast, and I'll make certain the whole world knows it." The carriage rolled off in a spray of gravel. Alina stood behind the hedge and she was shaking, but not the way she had shaken at the gate 9 days ago. That had been cold. This was rage. That was the first turn of the payoff, the first small victory, the moment the girl who had knelt in the gravel found a man willing to stand between her and the people who had emptied her life. If you've made it this far with me, take 1 second and hit that subscribe button. This is where the story stops being a rescue and starts being a reckoning, and you'll want to see how it ends. Now, let's get to the dinner table. Julian found Alina in the garden. She had not moved. Barnaby leaned his whole weight against her legs. "She's right about one thing," Alina said quietly. "My name, if I stay here, she'll destroy it. And a ruined name is the one thing a duke's kindness can't mend." She looked up at him. "You should have let me go. You've made an enemy for nothing." "Not for nothing," Julian said. He was quiet a moment. "Miss Whitcomb, I need to tell you something I should have told you the first night, when you said your father's name, Thomas Whitcomb." He touched the ruined side of his face, an old habit. 12 years ago there was a fire in a coaching inn on the Bath Road. I was inside it. So were 9 other travelers. 8 of them died. I lived because a man went back through the smoke and pulled me out and went back again for a child who was crying upstairs. He carried her out too, and then the roof came down. His jaw worked. The child lived. The man who saved us both did not walk away whole. He was burned across his hands and chest, and he never used his right arm again the same. But he lived. His name was Thomas Whitcomb, and I have spent 12 years hidden behind that gate believing I owed a debt I could never repay, because the man who saved me was already dead. Alina could not breathe. "He wasn't dead," Julian said softly. "He went home to his daughter, and 2 winters ago a fever took him, and a woman took everything he left behind, and his daughter ended up on her knees at my gate begging me to save a dog." He shook his head. "You think I saved you, Alina. I've spent 9 days trying to repay a debt to your father. You didn't fall at a stranger's gate. You fell at the gate of the one man in England who owed your family his life." She sat down hard on the cold garden bench, and this time she did cry, and Barnaby put his great gray head in her lap. "Then help me," she said at last, wiping her face. "Not out of debt. She's stealing my father's land. She's selling the house he saved my life to keep. I don't want your pity, your grace. I want my father's estate back, and I want her to answer for what she took." "That," said Julian, and for the first time she saw him smile, crooked and slow, "is exactly what I hoped you'd say. Then we'll do it properly. We'll do it where she can't lie her way out. I'm going to give a dinner." The invitations went out the next day. A Duke of Ashford who had not entertained a soul in 12 years was giving a dinner, and the county nearly fell over itself. He invited the magistrate, Sir Harold Bexley. He invited the vicar. He invited 2 old families whose word carried weight. And he invited Lady Prudence Whitcomb and her solicitor, Mr. Sedgwick, because a reckoning is no good unless the guilty are in the room to hear it. Lady Prudence came, of course. She could not resist. She believed she was walking into a triumph, ready to spread the tale of the ruined girl and the beast, ready to smile her knife smile at Alina across the table. She wore her finest. She brought Sedgwick. She did not know that for 9 days Julian's solicitor had been in the county town, in the parish records, in the bank at Elmsworth, quietly gathering every paper she had ever signed. The dinner was long and cold and civil. Alina sat at the Duke's right hand in a gown that fit, her hair done properly for the first time in 2 years, and she said little, and she watched her stepmother the way her stepmother had once watched her. When the last plates were cleared, Julian rose. "Before you go," he said to the table, "I have a matter of business. It concerns an estate, Elmsworth," he looked at Lady Prudence, "and a theft." The room went quiet. "When Thomas Whitcomb died," Julian went on, "he left a will, a simple one. his entire estate to his only child, Eleanor, to be held in trust and delivered to her upon her 21st birthday. His widow was granted a modest annuity and the right to remain at Elmsworth. That is all she was left. That is all she was owed. He nodded to his solicitor, who laid a paper on the table. This is the will, the true one, lodged with his attorney in London. Sir Harold, you may examine it. Lady Prudence's face was very still. But there is a second will, Julian said, and a second paper was laid down. This one appeared in the county after his death. It grants Lady Prudence full control of Elmsworth and its incomes until Eleanor marries, with the widow to choose the husband. Under it, she has managed the estate for 2 years. She has sold 400 pounds of timber. She has sold the horses, the carriage, and 3 paintings. And she arranged to marry her stepdaughter to Mr. Sedgwick before the girl came of age, so that control would pass to a man of her choosing, and the theft would never be counted. He set his hands on the table. There is only one problem with this second will. He looked at Sedgwick, who had gone the color of ash. It is a forgery. It is dated the 3rd of November. Thomas Whitcomb's own physician has sworn he was insensible with fever from the 1st of that month until his death on the 9th. He could not have held a pen, let alone signed his name, and the witness who signed below him. Julian tapped the paper. A Mr. Sedgwick, the very solicitor sitting at this table, the same man who then offered to marry the heiress he had helped to rob. He straightened. Sir Harold, I believe forgery of a will is a hanging matter. The magistrate rose slowly, his face grim, and reached for the papers. Lady Prudence stood so fast her chair fell. This is absurd. This girl is a servant, a liar. Look at her. She scrubbed floors. She slept in a pantry. Her voice climbed. You take the word of a scullery maid over a lady of good. She slept in a pantry, Julian said, and his voice cut through hers like iron, because you put her there. She scrubbed floors in her own father's house because you stole the roof over her head and called it charity. She is not a servant, madam. She is Eleanor Whitcomb of Elmsworth, and you have known that every single day you made her carry your slops. He turned to the magistrate. Sir Harold, the physician's sworn statement is here. The London attorney is prepared to travel. The bank's records of the sales are here in her own hand. Do your duty. It was over very quickly after that. Sir Harold was an honest man, and honest men do not need long when the truth is laid out in front of them in ink. He took Sedgwick by the arm before the lawyer could reach the door. He informed Lady Prudence that she was not to leave the county, that a warrant would be sworn by morning, and that every shilling of Elmsworth's income for 2 years would be accounted for down to the last farthing. Lady Prudence turned to Eleanor then, and all the charm was gone, and what was left was only hatred and fear. You have no idea what you've done, she whispered. I do, Eleanor said. She stood. She was not shaking now. I've counted the horses, I've counted the paintings, I've counted every night I slept on a cold floor while you slept in my mother's bed. She stepped closer. You sent me here as a joke. You dressed me in rags and dumped me at the gate of the man you called a monster, and you laughed. She glanced at Julian, and something in her steadied. He turned out to be the kindest man I've ever known, and you turned out to be exactly what you always were. So no, I don't pity you. I only wish my father had lived to see it. They took Lady Prudence and Sedgwick away that same night. The trial came in the spring. It did not take long. A forged will, a physician's oath, a bank ledger in the defendant's own hand. Sedgwick, to save his neck, told the whole of it, how Lady Prudence had come to him within a month of the funeral, how they had drawn up the false will together, how the plan had always been to marry Eleanor off before she could inherit. Lady Prudence was convicted of fraud and the theft of an estate. She did not hang. The forger's hand was Sedgwick's, and it was he who paid that price. But she was stripped of everything, the annuity revoked, and she was transported beyond the seas, which for a woman who had lived her whole life for county drawing rooms was its own kind of ending. She never set foot in England again. Elmsworth came back to a leaner whole. What had been sold was recovered where it could be, paid back where it could not. She stood in the hall of her father's house for the first time in 2 years, and it was empty and dusty and half-stripped, and she wept, and then she wiped her face and began to make it a home again. The paintings came back from the buyer who had them. The horses were repurchased. She had the library dusted first, before any other room, and she read Homer aloud in it until her voice gave out, because she could, and no one would ever punish her for it again. Julian did not press her. That was the thing about him. He had opened his gate and repaid his debt, and he seemed to believe that once Eleanor had her father's house back, she would want to fill it with her own life, far from a scarred recluse and his silent halls. He did not visit unless she asked. He wrote her careful, formal letters about the progress of the estate. He kept his distance the way a man keeps his hand off a wound he thinks is not his to touch. It was Eleanor who ended that. She rode to Ravenscar on a bright morning in June, with Barnaby limping along beside her horse, and she found the Duke in his garden. "You've been avoiding me," she said. "I've been giving you your life back," Julian said. "It's yours now. You needn't spend another day near a locked gate." "That's just it." Eleanor climbed down. "I don't want to spend another day near a locked gate. I want you to leave yours open." She took a breath. "For 12 years you hid because you thought a scar made you a monster. And then a woman brought you a girl in rags as a cruel joke, and you were the only person in the whole county who looked at that girl and saw a person worth saving." She stepped closer, and she did not flinch. She never had. "My father ran back into a fire for you, Julian. He knew what you were made of before you were burned. I know what you're made of now. So I'll ask you the way I asked you at the gate. Let me in, not as a debt, not as charity, just let me in." Julian Hartwell, who had not been touched with kindness in 12 years, reached out and took her hand, and this time he did not leave before she could see his face. They married in the autumn, in the little church he had not entered in a dozen years, and the whole county came, not to gawk at the beast and the beggar, but because the tale had gone round of the Duke who took in a girl the world had thrown away and made things right. Eleanor wore her mother's gown, recovered at last from the box her stepmother had hidden it in. Julian wore no shame on his face for the first time anyone could remember. Elmsworth and Ravenscar became one house in spirit if not in stone. Eleanor filled the dark halls with books and with light, and in time, with children who climbed on the old gray wolfhound and pulled his ears, and were never once told to be afraid of their father's face. Barnaby lived 2 more good years, warm by the fire, and when he finally went to sleep and did not wake, they buried him in the garden under a stone, and Eleanor knelt beside it the way she had once knelt in the gravel, and this time Julian knelt with her. She thought about that first night often. A hand between her shoulders, the frozen ground, the laughter fading down the road and the cold, and the certainty that she had reached the end of everything. She had knelt to shield an old dog from the wind, asking for nothing but that he be let inside. And a man with a locked gate and a ruined face had come down the steps and opened it, because her father had once run into a fire for a stranger. Because kindness, it turned out, was a debt that did not die with the man who paid it. It waited 12 years behind an iron gate, and then on the coldest night of a scullery maid's life, it opened. Some things the world takes from you: your home, your name, your place at your own father's table. But some things find their way back in the last shape you'd ever expect, wearing a scar, waiting at the top of the steps. Eleanor Whitcomb learned that on her knees in the gravel, in the dark, with nothing left but an old dog and a locked gate between her and the rest of her life. And the gate opened.